In our last class, we talked about audience segmentation, and today what we're going to do is we're going to examine goals. We're going to look at how you define goals and what should go into the process of goal setting and how to make the most impact for your effort through this process of goal setting. So let's continue on by looking at the next slide number 2. So we're going to look at this through the lens of the crisis, the British petroleum crisis in the Gulf states. So if all of you are aware or not aware, British Petroleum had an issue when one of their oil rigs exploded. And so when it exploded, the workers on it died. And not only did people die, but there was a tremendous amount of spillage into the Gulf, creating an environmental catastrophe, creating a catastrophe that impacted economics, tourism, etc., throughout the Gulf, right? So this is kind of like what I'm going to be bouncing off of when we talk about goals. If we were in person, I would be able to do it in a way that is more elaborative, but just work with me. So continue to the next slide, and you see the next slide, which is slide number 3. Some of the problems that resulted, right? You have birds covered in, seabirds covered in oil. The next slide number 4. You see all that black oil on the coastline there. I believe that this was off the coast of, I want to say either somewhere in Louisiana. But, you can see that problem. Continue on to the next slide number 5. And as a result, what happened? People protested left and right? People protested all over the country because of the issue. And the problem was British Petroleum took a chance. They knew there was a problem with the rig and they did not address that problem. And you see what happened, right? They were pumping a lot faster and they were pumping a lot deeper and they were pumping without safety checks, and an explosion occurred and a lot of injury and damage. Some of that damage won't be undone ever. And so we look at this PR catastrophe crisis that BP has found themselves in. Continue to the next slide. So when you think about goals, right? Goals are essentially for a PR effort, really working to establish what needs to change in a situation. Right? So what needs to change and how much of it needs to change, or to what extent something needs to change in order for an issue to be resolved according to a PR effort. This is essentially what you should do with goals, right? So we know that goals are really about the ultimate outcome that you want to see happen for a campaign. But what they should include are things, statements, information that make it clear that something needs to change. This is how much it's going to change. And this is what we are trying to address, right? So what are some things that can be changed in public relations efforts? So we should all know this, but you can change attitudes. You can change beliefs or perceptions, right? You can change opinions, and you can also change processes. Right? What do we mean by change processes? So you can change processes that are occurring within an organization, right? The way that an organization is doing something to make sure, in BP's case, right, whatever was going on internally that prevented them from conducting proper checks, right? That needs to change immediately. And then external processes, the way things are done outwardly amongst publics. So BP has had to really change the way that they work with communities, and not only communities and local governments. They've had to make sure that what they do is in alignment with policies, local policies, and even national policies. That's a process that had to change, right, as a result of their own actions. And so PR efforts can be aimed towards changing all of these things. So some of the problems that PR had, according to these images here, if you look at the figure at the top, the public turned against offshore drilling, specifically as a result of BP. And what this meant is that other companies were like, BP, you're a pain in the ass. We want to do our offshore drilling. And then you've got all this negative public sentiment toward offshore drilling. If it wasn't the case before, it is now. And so BP had other companies coming down on them, suing them also, because of opportunities that were lost as a result of seeing what happened with the BP catastrophe. And then you see the imagery that people have created, right? Boycott petroleum, right? Get a bike, and they use the BP logo as the tires, and then the chain in the middle, right? So you had a lot of this going on amongst the public. You had corporations coming down on BP, people protesting. You had governments coming down on BP. It was a nightmare for them. Continue to slide number 7. So when we talk about making up our goals, essentially what we want to do is we want to create what is called a goal statement. And in that goal statement, right, like you are trying to think about how you're going to format that. And the 3 things that I have bulleted here are essentially what you need to make sure your goal statement achieves. It needs to be real, simple, and straightforward. You know, the KISS acronym, keep it simple, stupid. Yep, I don't want to call you stupid, so keep it simple, students. There it is. So you really want to keep it simple, right? A single and really concise sentence, because you want people to see it and come away with it and understand, right? You don't want to have people read a novel to understand what your goal is with any PR effort. And you should really make sure that it doesn't include technical speak, right, and jargon. Should be straightforward. Everyone should be able to understand what your goal is. And it needs to reach or be inclusive of every public that you're trying to target. So what oftentimes happens is you might have an overarching goal, but you might see that you need to create a goal statement that has language that informs or signals to audiences that you mean them also, right? And then sometimes when you can't do that, there's an indication that you need to come up with varying goal statements, right? Varying goal statements for a single campaign is not unheard of, actually. It's all reaching toward the same goal, but you're just trying to reach a different audience or target, or speak to, I should say, different audience. So if we see some of these image-based examples here, these are things that organizations have created to protest BP. Greenpeace is now in it. So now they don't just have the government. They don't just have the public protesting. They don't just have other corporations. Now they've got nonprofit organizations with lots of money and lots of resource and lots of power all over the world coming after them. And they created a poster that, embellishes BP's logo with dripping oil as if the oil is blood, right? And then, you've got like the what is that? I don't know if that's like the anthrax symbol. And then they've imposed it upon BP's logo, whoever did that, right? But this is what was happening. And so they were fighting against not just the disrepair of their reputation, but everything that comes to represent them, down to the logo, right? They, now your logo is trash. So you have to come up with how you fix that, right? So this is something that they had to consider. So let's continue on to slide number 8. So it's important for you to understand the difference between a goal and an organizational mission or vision, right? So one way to do this is to think about the characteristics of a goal, right? So the goal, of course, should be situational and specific to a situation. It should engage publics or processes, right? And when I say engage, what I mean is that it should directly speak to a process or something, a problem, and people, right, audiences. It should be practical, and it should indicate some sort of time frame, right? And sometimes the time frame is not necessarily about you saying you want to do something in 6 or 7 months. But you say over the course of, a year, we want to be here, or with this project, we want to make sure we achieve this thing, right? So it has to be feasible, right? You can't just have goal statements that are hopeful but not possible. And And so the difference between a goal statement and an organizational mission or vision is that with organizational missions and visions, they're very broad, right? They are really about an outlook where an organization wants to be in terms of like some really proposed outlook for the future, far off into the reach, right? Like not today, not tomorrow, next year, but maybe like, the future of this company, where it's going, right? And so they're very distant and they're idyllic. What I mean by idyllic is they're really about like what the company strives to do for itself, what the company strives to do as an organization, right? So not very specific. So you can see the two examples up there of mission statements and vision statements, right? Long-term commitment to prosper, right? Very airy language, prosper. What does that mean? What does prospering look like, right? As an integrated international company with a strong technology base and focused marketing effort, right? So it's really about what the organization hopes to achieve, and it's very not very situational, right? So we asked the question, what could a feasible goal be? And let's continue on to the next slide, right? So the way you come up with a feasible goal is that you need to make sure that you're doing a number of things. You need to make sure that you're prioritizing, right? You need to make sure that you are thinking about addressing each problem based on the problem significant and its impact upon its publics, right? Is this problem of your logo and your logo being in tatters more important than you actually addressing environmental damage? Or are you going to worry about your logo before you worry about the environmental damage, right? What are you going to have most of your resources focused on? You're going to worry about repairing this environmental damage, and you're going to create PR that deals with recreating your logo and reinventing your brand identity later. That's not a priority. Let people have that ripping your brand apart. And so the issue of imminence, right, is what you need to be concerned with. Is the current problem or crisis that you find yourself in rapidly evolving? Is it changing to the point where like every news cycle, it is something else? With BP, it was. With BP, and by the way, guys, I should point out, just look at all the links at the bottom of the slide. Sorry, I was negligent in not telling you to do that. But if you look at the links at the bottom of the slides, it gives you context. So if you go back up to slide number 5, you see 2 links. Watch those 2 links. They're related to this issue with BP and the crisis and so on and so forth, just for context. I like for you always to understand where I'm coming from and where I'm going with context. And a great way to do this is through narratives. And so the BP narrative is a good one to have. So when we talk about imminence, right, we're back now on slide number 9. We're talking about how fast the problem is, changing. And with BP, the problem was really growing out of hand. Every news cycle, more oil spillage. Every news cycle, another community disrupted. Every news cycle, more animals found dead or covered in oil. They couldn't keep up with it. It was too much, right? This crisis was rapidly evolving. So it was imminent, right? Is the media environment volatile? Is the political environment volatile? Yes. For BP, it was, right? You had protesters. You had people calling for the arrest of the leadership of BP. You had politicians calling for accountability, calling for them to go before Congress, calling for all sorts of things at the local, state, and federal levels, right? So there was a lot of volatility in the media environment, in the political environment, as well as in the social environment, with all of the public protest and the public disdain of what had happened. Is there an opportunity to course correct? Well, if you're in the business of PR, there's always an opportunity to course correct. That's your job, to course correct, right? In some instances, the damage has been done and you can't fix some of what has been done. So for example, people had died on that oil rig in the explosion. That cannot be fixed. There are people who don't have loved ones as a result of BP's negligence. They went to work and never came back to their families. there's nothing that you can do to bring them back, right? But, you know, organizations oftentimes do things, right, through litigation to try to remedy and make whole situations. And that's what we mean by course correcting. Is there an opportunity to course correct? Well, if we're looking at this from a litigation standpoint, then yes. So some of the things that you saw in terms of this rapidly evolving environment was that, you know, you had people coming up with all sorts of critiques of BP, public critiques. So if you look at the images here, the video game solution to the BP oil spill, you even had video games and comic book writers getting in on it, right? Making video games that would like clean up the ocean, right? So people would say, if the animators can get on it, why can't you, right? It takes them longer to program and code than it takes you to like actually get equipment and resources out there with all your money to fix this, right? So, there was a lot of problems for them, and I would have hated to be their PR person. Like that is like a pill I would never have wanted to swallow. Anyway, then you have like John, what is his name? John Stewart? I forget his name. The comic guy, right? That had the Daily Show and all this other stuff. You had him every night. He was keeping a toll of the BP oil spill and what they were doing and how they were reacting. And if you click on that link, you see John Stewart and his Daily Show routine where he gets on them about their negligence and their foolery and taking so long to address the problem. Continue to slide number 10. So with slide number 10, when we talk about prioritizing the problem or the issue in a crisis situation, one of the things that you need to do in order to establish a goal is conduct what is called an impact analysis. And in order to conduct the impact analysis, what you need to do is you need to understand how significant the impact this crisis or problem is for your organization's future, for its current state of health. Is it costing you money to the point where you'll have to fire employees immediately? Is it so bad that like for the public to be okay for now, you have to fire leadership immediately so that they can see you're doing something right? What do you need to do right now? How much has this impacted your organization? And that is going to affect your goals, right? That you establish for addressing the issue, making things right. So this notion of which problems or issues should be addressed first. Again, do we do a public restructuring of leadership? Do we, get resources and machinery and manpower out there so that can be visible? Do we meet with Congress first and work on immediate passing of legislation within a week to show that we are serious about doing things right? These are all decisions that you need to make concurrently, right? When you're in an organization. And when these decisions are made, they might be management decisions. But not only do you have to communicate these decisions internally to internal publics within the organization, but your role as a PR individual or entity is to communicate these decisions and the impact of these decisions to publics as a good show of faith in a time of crisis, right? So the other things that you need to really consider are your losses and negative turns. So what we mean by losses are, of course, are you losing money? Are you going to forego property? Are there losses to sort of your functional environment? Are you losing partnerships? Are you losing support in the media? Are you literally losing, crucial infrastructure or networks that you've created, partnerships that you've created as an organization? Are you losing sponsorships? Are you using community relations partners? Are you losing sort of a lot of social capital that you've built up as a result of your actions? That's the environmental aspect. And then this idea of, a negative turn, right? Maybe people never thought so much of BP before, but boy, after this, people were like, this organization is for the trash. So people's beliefs, attitudes, and opinions, if they had sort of mild or tepid or negative perceptions before, now, they really took a negative turn. And then again, are you losing clients, right? Are you losing sort of public sentiment or trust? Has it taken a negative turn, their sentiment or their perceptions? These are some of the things that you need to think about. Again, you see an image here of how the comic world has addressed the problem of BP quicker than BP, right? All these things were coming out and about. Continue on to the next slide, which is slide number 11. And so this issue of prioritizing the problem also relates to analyzing what actions you can take, what actionable measures are possible for us as an organization in order to fix this. Oftentimes, you need to think about whether or not PR alone is going to remedy a situation. In such a horrible crisis, people look at all of the PR efforts as just surface coating, bandage work. Publics are clever, right? They will call you out on it. So you need to make sure that what you're doing by way of your PR work is met with real action, and that real action is also communicated. Like, there needs to be measurable and tangible things happening fast in real time, producing obvious results and making obvious impact. So PR entities ethically have to put themselves in a position of saying, are we going to sing the praises of our organization and what they're doing if they're not actually doing it? And here comes the issue of ethics. And here comes the issue of disclosure. And here comes the issue of thinking about your stakeholders. Are we going to overstate what we're doing? And the stakeholders might think we're doing this, but we're not really doing it just to save face. So you really need to think that the actions that you take will not be resolved just through PR alone, and that you better make sure that whatever you're doing by way of PR is matched with things that are actually happening, that are measurable, like can be analyzed and evaluated and estimated and quantified, right? And you better make sure that what you're doing is also able to prove some sort of result that you can pass along through your PR work, right? So PR entities and people that work in PR for organizations have to consult management, leadership about what they need to do as well. Like, we're not going to say these things until this is done. This is how we need to approach this. And we can't do that unless these things are in place. So this is where the consulting role comes in place, right? So what kinds of problems can communication resolve? This is what you need to try to understand. You need to really come up with a communication plan. What problems amongst your various publics can be ameliorated and resolved through communication, right? Like what sort of things can be addressed right now simply through messaging, simply through having feedback, right? Simply through having a two-way process in place where you can use feedback and then work on that feedback to communicate to audiences immediately and also in the future, right? So BP's problem, if you see there, is that these 11 men died and they were on this oil rig, and those 11 men were not coming back. So now they had lawsuits, right? Now they had lawyers that had teamed up with the family members of these people that are lost forever. Some of them very, very young, right? Just starting their lives. And they took it to court, right? And they had everything available at their disposal by way of support for their case. So you've got this case and you've got these lives and these faces attached with the damage that your negligence has done, working against you in the public, for the public to see. So when we talk about goals, we need to think about single versus multiple goals. So we talked about how you might have to develop multiple goals depending on the nature of your audience and how specific you want to be. And that's fine. Usually you have a single goal just in a general sense, but when you have a problem like this, you might need to come up with multiple goals. in a crisis situation. So you need to know when to and not to go to the single versus multiple goal route. So what's going to be a factor in this process of whether or not you have single or multiple goals? Well, resources, right? Are your resources that your organization have they been impacted in a way where they're going to affect your how your organization operates, and what resources are you going to use to fix your situation? And that all depends on like human resources, your workers, your employees, right? Your PR entities. How have they been impacted? Are you going to have to lay people off? Are you going to have to lay them off to hire more PR people and dispatch these PR people throughout the world? This happens, guys, right? PR people that work on consultancies are oftentimes dispatched because of crises. And they do consulting. So how have media about your organization been impacted, and how are you going to use media? How have your finances been impacted, and how are you going to use the current monies that you have to allocate, the resources that your company has available? How are you going to use the finances that you have to fix things, right? Logistical things, right? What does your logistical infrastructure look like in an organization, right? Where are things located? Offices, headquarters. Can we get people to places to solve this problem? Can we get machinery to the oil site to solve the problem, right? These are things that you got to think about. And then social capital. Again, what people have left you, what organizations have left you, what politicians are no longer helping you out because you've just tarnished any possibility for them being able to vie for you any longer with this stunt, right? This negligence. Has that been lost in this situation? That social capital that your organization has built over time? And if there's any remaining, how are you going to use that? Who are these actors? Who are these institutions that are still there and willing to go to bat for you and help you in this time? These are all things that you need to think about when you're thinking about goals, because you might need to address all of these resource deficiencies with your goals. You might need to have messages that are targeted toward audiences that build up your social capital again, right? Your philanthropists, the politicians, they might be audiences, right? And then the other thing that you need to do is you need to think about doing your research, right? So some of the things that you need to consider with research in this situation of establishing a goal is like the ease of the research, right? Like the ease of the goal, right? What scale of research and effort, what effort are we going to need to sort of take in order to conduct research? How are we going to assess populations in order to segment audiences, right? So in a time like this, I don't think that there's any ease to the research. There's just a lot of research that needs to happen, and you need to make sure that you have dedicated resources and staff to do just that. And you need to think about the pace, right? Will you have time to complete the phases of your research? Will you have time to properly analyze and then use what you find in an applied sense? Apply that research to real life situations, right? To make things change, or to repair things, or to fix things, or to understand situations, or to do better PR work, right? How are you going to, do research in a timely enough manner that it is going to support any goals that you want to set? And then the breadth of the research is what you need to think about. How much research do we do? How much do we need to study and look at and examine? And for how long? Because with this situation for BP, the problem was a multi-layered one, right? So they had the immediate problem of this, explosion in the oil spill, but the actual problem went back years, and it had to do with an internal issue. So how much research are we going to do on this? How do we divide that research? Do we do research about public sentiment based on this actual event, this problem, that crisis that happened? Or do we further the research and, get into the depths of what went wrong in terms of management so that we can be able to talk about this too and show an honest face about how we're trying to fix what happened in the past. So this is, internal research that needs to happen so that you can do good PR work and be able to speak to things that might arise in terms of questions or challenges that you might be faced with, not just in a time of crisis, but, stakeholders are gonna want to know. You came up with these goals, but, how does that match up with, things that have happened in the past or where you're trying to go now? These are valid questions that organizations will ask. So if you look at these two images here, right, you can see they're really about more problems. The top image, a CNN image, is about the oil slick and how the wildlife in 4 states are dying and they're in trouble. And then they have this Google Earth satellite imagery showing you all of the problem areas there, right? Day by day, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday evening, where the oil has spread to. So they had a problem that was growing exponentially, impacting everyone and everything in that environment. And it was just a looming nightmare. So essentially trying to make things right and to show good face and show accountability, the BP CEO went and testified in front of, he went to Capitol Hill to testify about what happened and how they plan to make it right? Because these are stakeholders. You are politically responsible. There are policies in place that govern what you do, but also you have to build social capital. You have to build support. You have to be given chances to function as an organization, and you have to build goodwill. And so that is part of the process of PR. In a crisis situation, everyone is a PR actor. The CEO, everything that you do is about PR in a crisis situation, whether you want to accept that or not. So let's continue on to slide number 13. So when we go to slide number 13, we move on to research for goals and thinking about the feasibility of a strategy that you're going to come up with. So when you're establishing your goals, the things that you need to think about is what is my strategy going to focus on achieving, right? So you have to go beyond just the goal and think about, is it possible to satisfy this goal based on a possible strategy? And if so, what am I going to focus on here, right? You also have to think about what priorities you need to set and how these priorities can be served through any possible efforts you're going to take and how that's going to satisfy any particular goal. So what you're really thinking about is it even possible to make this happen, right? Because you don't want to go the course of, as they call it, selling wolf tickets, right? Talking bigger than you can deliver. And the other issue is what audiences are going to be targeted in this PR effort or this multi-layered PR effort. These are things that you're going to constantly have to assess and measure at any given point in time, whether there's a crisis or not, but particularly in a crisis, these are things that you need to address. And so again, the media environment was on fire because look, Time magazine, which has ridiculous worldwide circulation, right? So Time magazine, is seen by students in elementary schools to executives in boardrooms, right? It's a very trusted source. And now Time has taken this up and it's how to clean up the mess and who's to blame, right? And they really make the case for what BP didn't do and why this problem got to where it is. And so now you have to contest with research that organizations are conducting about your very problem and the negligence, right? So in PR issues, you have to address all of these things, right? Discoveries that are made about your organization. And that all takes targeted effort, right? That all takes sort of focus and strategy, and your goals have to be aligned with all of this. Let's continue to the next slide. The next slide is slide number 14. So another thing that you have to think about with regard to goals is what type of impact are you trying to make and how are you going to make impact? And the two things that are really, really important in this case is with the goal that I'm setting, am I stating things in my goal statement that can be measured? Can I measure their effects over time? Am I saying that I'm doing this thing and am I able to analyze whether or not what I have done has been effective over time? Can I measure that impact? How much or how little we have achieved in the way toward realizing a particular goal, right? So you really want to measure that impact. Another thing that you want to understand about your goal is like, will my efforts be seen, right? When we talk about being seen and being observable in this case, we want to think about, will my efforts to change things both internally and internally produce something by way of process or material, things that are realized that everyone can look at and say, yes, there's been real change, that people will recognize readily and handily and say, there's actually been some change here. They've actually done what they said that they're going to do. Can people see that internally, right? And by way of process, right? And by way of feedback that you're getting based on what you're doing as well, right? Can you see real change in public sentiment if you're in an organization and you're on a PR team? But also, can the public see that your organization has made change, right? You want to understand as a PR entity that people see the changes that you are making to address an issue. People see that you're working toward a goal and that changes have been made, and these changes are visible. They might not always be tangible, but people can measure them based on their observation. They can say, it was like this before, well, it's changed, it's like this now, we can see that. That's what you want, right? You want public perception to be moved by actual visible change, measurable change. That impact is what you want. And so this is very, very important. So some of the things that VP did to try to engage publics were they opened like community information hotlines, right, to get feedback and complaints and report new problems. And this was an effort that they thought would prove to show that they're really trying to address the issue. But one of the initial problems is that people felt like they were calling this hotline and then nothing was happening, right? Like they would leave a message sometime. Initially, they just had like people leave a message. But then people were like, there's nothing happening, I'm just leaving a message. So they hired people to actually take calls. So once people got a human being on the line, they felt better assured that maybe their issue would be addressed. And then they took it a step further. They had people follow up. They had people go to and contact individuals that had called in and left messages and spoken to someone, and had them go and make reports about issues, right? And then do follow up with each individual based on these reports. And so only then people say, well, maybe they are actually trying to change things, right? They could visibly see that there were some changes being made in the way that they were trying to handle this. And that, I don't know if it fared well for PR, but it was necessary PR work to do. And then you had these people doing these sort of like demonstrations, right? So what we mean by demonstrations is like you would have people dressed up in in BP uniforms, BP logos, and they would go out and they would actually be walking around on the beaches and trying to do cleanup work so that you are making it visible that people that work for BP are out here cleaning up. Right? And then many people didn't buy it. They were like, that shit is an act. But nevertheless, it had to be done, right? It had to be done. Despite it looking like an act, well, you can't say that we're not trying, right? You can't say that we're not out there. And then they also had, a media blitz of campaigns, mass mediated campaigns. If you look at the image on the bottom with Iris Cross, BP Community Outreach, they had this commercial going on where it was just like this woman, Iris Cross, comes on the screen and she says, I'm from Louisiana, so my community was impacted and I work for BP and we're out here doing, outreach with the community to understand how the community has been impacted so we can affect positive change and make things right. BP is trying. So a huge media PR blitz using people that were supposedly local, right? People in the whole thing with there is that there's people in BP that are working for you and they come from this community, so they understand what you're going through and they're genuine and they're real and we're making real efforts. And so, visual communication impacts are indicators, right? People must see what's going on. They must visibly see that you're trying to do things, to change things. And then you are at the same time, while all of these hotlines are up and all of these BP people out there cleaning up and all the Iris Cross commercials are out there, you're conducting research amongst the publics to gather public sentiment, to see whether or not they're seeing what you're actually investing in terms of all this being out there. And then you're measuring impact in their perception and their attitudes. Are things changing? Is this working for us? That's what the PR team is doing, while others are actually fixing the problem at bay, right? The real tangible problem. Continue on to slide number 15, which is the last slide, right? So in terms of your goals, you're thinking about the scope of your efforts. How big does our effort need to be, right? So really, are we looking at this in very broad terms? Or are we like breaking down micro efforts? Are we, having PR efforts that are scaled down to deal with specific problems? Are we layering this effort? Are we combining all of our efforts? These are things that you have to design, and you have to think about that by way of your goals. And this is why you have to sometimes develop multiple goals. You can't have a single goal in a situation of a crisis sometimes, because the problems are vast. The audience related issues are vast. So you need to think about that. So some of the considerations that you need to try to level with if you're engaged in PR, like how is the scope of your effort here and the layer and the nature of the problem going to impact the strategies that you choose and the subsequent tactics that you develop and you relay in your effort. You need to think about staffing issues, right? How complex does your staff need to look like or be? Are you going to staff people online, right? Are you going to staff people in offices? Are you going to staff people internationally? Depends on your problem, right? So the issue of logistics also relates to this issue of place, right? Place and space. How are you using place and space? How are we working out this operation? How are we dispatching people? Where are our messages gonna be, right? Where are we doing a lot of our messaging? In media spaces, right? Is it on TV? Is it on radio? Is it on internet? Are we doing face-to-face? What is our organization doing? And how can we take our messaging that we're going to make available to publics and match it to what our organization is doing in each location, right? So these are the madness situations that you have to think about. You have to think about, again, the nature of your audiences. If we have a multi-level or a multi-layered crisis, then you need to develop, plans and strategies and goal statements for each of these audiences. You have to really understand the scope of that audience. You need to understand how much money you're going to have to put out versus how much you're going to lose, right? Sometimes a PR effort happens in a crisis situation and you're already working at a loss, but you've got to do that PR work to remedy the situation. You know that financial disrepair is just in your future and there's no going back. You're already in the hole, but you've got to fix your reputation if you're going to function as an organization. And then time, right? How much time do you have? Has there been some sort of time limitation put on you by some agency? Has the government said, BP, you've got 3 months to fix this, right? Now you're working within a time constraint. So how do you allocate PR resources in a number of places to, show that you're working fast and trying to get things done, right? And to show stakeholders and politicians that you're working fast and you're getting things done. How are you using time and allocating that 3 months that you have to get things done in the way of a PR effort? So these are some things that you have to think about as you establish goals. So if you look at the image on this slide, right, see, Tony Hayward really was just a hot mess of a CEO. Because when all this happened, he had the opportunity to go public and make a statement and show empathy. And what he wound up doing was creating a huge problem for the organization, further entrenching the negative views about BP. So he goes on, television, or he's interviewed at the site of this catastrophe. And one of the things that he says is like, yeah, I'd like this to be over. I'd like my life back, right? And when he said that, like, it set everyone off. Because it was like, you want your life back? There are people that are dead. There are people whose businesses will never revive. There are people their properties, everything done. And you want your life back, Tony Hayward? And so that alone got Tony Hayward fired. Take a look at the 3 clips below. They explain that situation very well. And this concludes today's lesson about goal setting. So these are just some things that I walked you through that you need to consider when you're thinking about creating your goals. If you have any questions at all, please do feel free to ask. Take care.